The 14th wolf collapsed at dawn, and my healer pressed her forehead to the stone floor and told me she had nothing left to try. I stood over the animal, a gray she-wolf named Ashka who had run patrols on the eastern ridge for 9 years without faltering, and watched her ribs rise and fall in a rhythm too shallow to sustain anything. Her fur had gone dull, the way all of them went dull before the end. Her eyes, half open, did not track my hand when I passed it across her line of sight. "How long?" I asked. Sira, my head healer, did not lift her face from the floor. 2 days, maybe 3, the same as the others. The others? 13 wolves before Ashka, each one struck by the same blight, a creeping fever that settled into the bond between wolf and human, fraying it like wet rope until the wolf simply stopped responding. The first had died in mid-spring. By the time the snow came back to Thornmere, we had lost 13, and every remedy Sira and her apprentices tried, the poultices, the mineral salts, the concentrated moonwort extract that was supposed to strengthen the spirit bond, did nothing but slow the dying by a day or 2. I crouched beside Ashka and laid my palm flat against her flank. She was burning. "Leave us," I said. Sira rose and left the den without a word. She had been crying. I could smell it on her, the salt and the exhaustion, and I did not blame her for either. When the door closed, I leaned down until my mouth was near Ashka's ear. "Hold on," I told her. "I am going to find out what is happening to you, all of you." Her tail moved once, a single, weak thump against the stone. It broke something in my chest that I did not know was still whole. I found Finn in the corridor, already armored, already reading my face. "Another one?" he asked. "Ashka." He swore under his breath, the only profanity I would tolerate from my beta, and only because Ashka had been paired with his sister on the Eastern Patrol for years. That makes 14, Kale, 14 wolves in 4 months. If the blight keeps moving through the bond lines, it will reach the inner pack within weeks. I had done the arithmetic myself, late at night, staring at the tally marks I kept on the wall above my desk. 14 sick, 13 dead, 1 dying, and 46 wolves in the stronghold still standing, every one of them a thread in the web that held Thornmere together. Sira has nothing. The old texts have nothing. The healers from Greymount sent word they have never seen this sickness. Fenn fell into step beside me. "There is one thing I have not told you." I stopped walking. "The wolves that died," he said carefully. "Not all of them died in the stronghold." "Explain." 3 of the 13 Breck, the young patrol wolf, Harrel's bonded gray, and the runt from the southern litter, they did not die in their dens. They vanished in the night. Their handlers found empty beds, cold stone. We assumed they crawled out to die alone. Wolves do that sometimes. "You assumed." Fenn held my gaze. He was not a man who flinched. "I assumed. But last night a scout on the western tree line reported movement, something large low to the ground dragging itself toward the Ashdown forest. He thought it was a deer, but there was a second shape behind it, a person, hooded, slight, pulling the wolf on a canvas litter." The silence in the corridor was absolute. "Someone," I said, "is taking my dying wolves." "Someone is, and they have been doing it for weeks." I turned toward the armory. "Wake the tracking detail." "Kale." Fenn's hand landed on my arm, an act of courage or recklessness. With me, the two were often the same. "There is something else." The scout followed the trail for half a league before he lost it. He said the direction was due west, into the deep Ashdown, past the Tannies boundary. The Tannies boundary. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in Thornmere's halls for 6 years, not since the night Elder Hask and 3 of his council stood in my father's court and demanded the banishment of old Marin Tannies and her granddaughter. The charges were dark craft, unsanctioned herb work, communion with wild wolves outside pack authority. My father, 2 months from his own death and too tired to fight his council, had signed the order. The old woman and the girl were escorted past the boundary stones before dawn and told that if they crossed back, the pack's justice would not be gentle. I had been 23. I remembered the girl, slight, dark-haired, silent as they marched her out. She had not looked back. She had not begged. She had walked into the tree line with her grandmother's hand in hers and vanished as if the forest had been waiting for her. "The Weed Woman's girl," Fenn said quietly. "Briar Tanny's. If she is the one taking the wolves, then I will find her." I pulled my arm free. "No tracking detail. I go alone." Fenn opened his mouth to argue, and I gave him the look that ended arguments. He closed it. I left the stronghold within the hour, armed but unhurried, following the scouts' report due west through the snow-heavy pines of the lower Ashdown. The forest swallowed the sounds of Thornmere behind me, the forges, the shouts of the patrol change, the low whine of the sick wolves in the healer's den, and replaced them with the clean silence of deep winter, wind in the canopy, snow sifting through the branches, the occasional crack of a frozen limb giving way under its own weight. I tracked well. My father had taught me before the blight of politics taught him to stop caring about anything that mattered, and I had kept the skill sharp through years of border patrols and hunt runs. The litter marks were faint but readable, 2 narrow drag lines in the snow, human boot prints beside them, the occasional smear of blood where the wolf had coughed or shifted. The trail was hours old, already filling with fresh snowfall, but I could read it the way a man reads a letter written in a hand he knows. Whoever had made this trail was strong for their size. The boot prints were small, a woman's or a young man's, but the stride was steady, unhurried, the kind of walk that belongs to someone who has covered this ground many times and does not need to think about where to place their feet. The litter had been dragged uphill for nearly a league without a single pause or stumble. That spoke of practice. Weeks of practice. I followed the trail past the old Tanny's boundary stones, 2 mossy granite pillars that had once marked the edge of pack-sanctioned territory. Someone had carved small wolves into their faces, crude but careful, and hung dried lavender bundles from the crossbar. The lavender was fresh. Beyond the stones, the forest changed. The pines thinned and the hardwoods took over ash and silver birch, their bare branches laced with frost. The ground rose steadily toward the Silverthorn Ridge, and the snow deepened until I was wading through it to my shins. The litter marks vanished under the fresh fall, but I did not need them anymore. There was a path here, not a game trail, not a deer run, but a deliberate path worn into the forest floor by months or years of the same boots walking the same route. It had been swept recently, cleared of deadfall, maintained. Someone lived here, had lived here for a long time. I smelled the smoke before I saw the cabin. It came through the trees like a thread, wood smoke and something else, something green and bitter and medicinal. Juniper, maybe. Yarrow. The sharp tang of boiled willow bark. It was the smell of a healer's kitchen, and it was the smell of the old Tanny's woman's cottage from my boyhood, the one that had stood at the edge of the lower village before the banishment. I stopped at the tree line and looked. The cabin sat in a clearing at the base of the ridge, small, well-built, with a stone chimney trailing gray smoke and a covered porch stacked with firewood. A frozen creek ran along its eastern side, and someone had broken the ice and laid out a row of water pails. The yard was clean, orderly, practical. And around the cabin, in the snow in the yard on the porch, pressed against the walls, wolves. I counted them, 12. 12 wolves lying in the snow or curled on blankets spread across the porch boards. Some were sleeping. Some were awake, their eyes open, their ears tracking the small sounds of the forest. One, a big, dark-furred male I recognized instantly as Breck, the young patrol wolf who had vanished 3 weeks ago, was standing on his own 4 legs, shaking snow from his coat, moving with a steadiness that should have been impossible for an animal I had been told was dead. Breck was alive, he looked healthy, his coat had its sheen back. I scanned the others. Harold's bonded gray, alive, sleeping against the porch rail, a poultice wrapped around her left foreleg. The runt from the southern litter, alive, small and thin but breathing evenly, tucked into a nest of blankets near the door. And 9 more I did not recognize by sight but knew by scent, pack wolves, Thornmere wolves, all of them carrying the faint trace of the blight in their fur but none of them dying. None of them dying. The cabin door opened and she walked out. She was not what I expected. I do not know what I expected, the weed woman's girl, the banished child, a feral creature wrapped in skins and silence. What I saw was a woman, late 20s, dark-haired, dressed in a worn wool coat and heavy boots, carrying a wooden bowl of something steaming. She moved across the porch with the quiet certainty of someone who has a job to do and no interest in being watched while she does it. She knelt beside the runt, checked the small wolf's breathing with 2 fingers pressed behind its jaw, and then lifted its head gently and tipped the bowl to its lips. The runt drank, its tail stirred. She stroked its ears once, set the bowl down and straightened. That was when she saw me. Everything stopped. The forest, the wind, the soft sounds of the sleeping wolves, all of it fell away, and there was only her face across 30 yards of snow and something inside my chest that I had never felt before. Not a sound, not a pull. A recognition, deep, cellular, older than language, as if every bone in my body had turned toward her at once and said, "There." My wolf, who had been restless and anguished for months, pacing behind my ribs, unable to settle, unable to explain what it wanted, went perfectly, absolutely quiet. Not still. Quiet. The way a creature goes quiet when it has finally found the thing it was looking for and does not want to frighten it away. She did not run, she did not beg. She did not do any of the things I might have expected from a banished woman caught on pack-adjacent land, with 12 stolen wolves. She set her jaw, squared her shoulders, and said, "If you have come to punish me, do it after I finish the evening dosing. 2 of them are still critical." Her voice was steady, low, a little hoarse as if she did not use it often, and underneath the defiance something else, a resignation so practiced it must have been her companion for years. She expected the worst from me. She expected the worst from Thornmere. She had been expecting it since the night my father signed the order that took her home. I did not move. I stood at the tree line with the snow around my boots and the smoke curling above her roof, and the 12 wolves, my pack's wolves, the ones I had mourned, breathing quietly in the yard, and I tried to understand what I was looking at. "You took them," I said. "I found them." Her chin lifted. "Dying. In the snow. In the drainage ditches along the eastern ridge. Crawling out of the stronghold at night because their bodies told them to find help and the help inside your walls was not working. I found them and I carried them here and I healed them." "With what?" "With the remedies your council called dark craft." Her eyes did not waver. "Juniper root, black willow, ground moonstone in a yarrow base. The old formulas my grandmother taught me before your elders decided her knowledge was dangerous and her life was inconvenient." The bitterness in her voice was not for show. It was the kind that comes from years of cold nights and unanswered questions. The kind you learn to carry so quietly that it becomes part of your spine. "The blight," I said, "you know what it is." "I know what it is. I have known since the first wolf showed up at my boundary stones 3 months ago, half dead and burning with a fever no mineral salt would touch." She gestured at the yard, at Breck standing steady on his legs, at the gray sleeping with her poultice, at the 9 others resting in various stages of recovery. Root rot. A corruption in the spirit bond's anchor, the deep nerve cluster where the wolf and the human meet. Your healers are treating the symptoms. The fever, the lethargy, the dulling of the coat. They are not reaching the root. The old formulas do. My grandmother mapped every nerve cluster in a wolf's bond line 40 years ago. Your council burned her notes. I felt something cold settle in the pit of my stomach that had nothing to do with the winter air. They burned them. Elder Hask burned them himself, in the courtyard, The night before we were marched out. She looked at me, not with hatred, not with the wild anger I might have understood, but with a weariness that made her seem older than she was. You were there. I remember you. You stood on the balcony. You did not stop it. She was right. I had stood on the balcony. I had watched the fire in the courtyard and the old woman clutching her granddaughter's hand, and I had done nothing, because I was 23 and my father was the Alpha, and the council was the council. And I had told myself that herb work and dark craft were the same thing, because it was easier than asking questions that had no comfortable answers. I did not stop it, I said. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to the runt and adjusted the blanket around its small body. The evening dosing takes an hour. 2 of them need the vapor treatment. I boiled juniper and willow bark and let them breathe the steam. If you are going to drag me back for judgment, wait until they are stable. That is all I ask. I walked across the yard toward the cabin. The wolves watched me. Breck raised his head and tracked my movement with eyes that were clear and bright and full of a trust I had not earned. The big gray by the porch rail opened one eye, assessed me, and closed it again. I am not going to drag you anywhere, I said. She looked up. For the first time, the mask of defiance cracked, and I saw something underneath it, a flash of confusion. A flicker of hope snuffed out almost before it appeared, as if she had taught herself long ago that hope was a luxury she could not afford. Then why are you here? Because my wolves are dying, I said, and you are the only person who knows how to save them. She stared at me. The steam from the bowl curled between us, and the runt at her knees stirred and pressed its nose against her hand, and somewhere inside my chest, my wolf made a sound I had never heard from it before, not a howl, not a growl, but something low and reverent and aching, like a door opening onto a room that had been locked for a very long time. I did not tell her about the bond. Not then. There would be time for that, and she had wolves to tend, and I was not fool enough to think that a banished woman would welcome the news that the Alpha King whose father had signed her exile order now felt the universe rearranging itself around the axis of her hands. So I did the only thing that made sense. I took off my cloak, folded it, laid it on the porch rail and said, "Tell me what to do." She blinked. "I can carry water," I said. "I can break ice, split wood, hold a wolf's head while you pour medicine. I am not a healer, but I am not useless, and you have 12 patients in 2 hands." For a long moment she said nothing. The wind moved through the clearing, lifting a curl of dark hair from her forehead, and the wolves in the yard shifted and resettled, and the smoke from the chimney leaned east. "The ice needs breaking on the creek," she said. "The axe is by the door." I broke the ice. I hauled water. I split a cord of wood while she moved through the yard, checking each wolf with a practiced hand. Temperature behind the jaw, breath rate, the clarity of the eyes, the responsiveness of the spirit bond, to a gentle press of her palm against the animal's chest. She spoke to the wolves quietly as she worked, not the baby talk some handlers used, but a low, steady narration. "You're breathing better today. That's good. Let me look at this leg. Hold still." And every wolf, without exception, leaned into her touch the way a compass needle leans north. I watched her from the woodpile, my hands raw and my breath clouding in the cold air, and I felt the recognition deepen with every minute. It was not the thunderclap I had been taught to expect. The stories all spoke of lightning, fire, the world going white. This was quieter than that, steadier. It was the feeling of watching someone do the thing they were born to do and understanding, with a certainty that bypassed thought entirely, that you were supposed to be standing exactly where you were standing, watching exactly this. She treated the 2 critical wolves, a young female with a bond fever so high her fur was hot to the touch, and an older male whose spirit bond had nearly severed, with a vapor treatment that involved a covered basin of boiling juniper water, a tent of oiled canvas, and a patience I could not have matched. She sat with each wolf for 20 minutes adjusting the tent, adding fresh bark to the water, murmuring the same low, steady reassurance. I held the canvas when she asked me to. Our hands brushed once over the basin's edge, and the shock of it, the warmth, the jolt, the sudden rightness made us both go still. She pulled her hand back. I did not. "What is your name?" she asked, though I knew she already knew. "Cale Morn, Alpha of Thornmere." "I know who you are. I meant, what do they call you when you are not the Alpha?" No one had asked me that in years. Cale. Cale? She tested it, and something in the way she said it, careful, unhurried, as if the syllable mattered, made my wolf press against the inside of my ribs like a hand against a window. "I am Briar. I know who you are." "Do you?" "The Weed Woman's girl, that is what they called you." Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes flinched. "That is what they called me." "I am calling you Briar." She looked at me for a long time. Then she turned back to the wolf under the canvas and said, "This one needs another 10 minutes. There is broth on the stove if you are hungry." I went inside. The cabin was small but immaculate, a single room with a hearth, a workbench covered in jars and bundles of dried herbs, a narrow bed against the far wall, a shelf of hand-bound journals. The journals drew my eye. They were thick, carefully maintained, written in a small, precise hand that I recognized, not Briar's, but older, more deliberate. Marantani's hand. The grandmother. I pulled one down and opened it. The pages were dense with diagrams, wolf anatomy, nerve clusters, the pathways of the spirit bond drawn in ink so fine it looked like embroidery. Notes in the margins. Juniper root applied to the third cluster restores conductivity within 48 hours. Black willow must be harvested after the first frost for full potency. The moonstone acts as a binding agent, not a cure. The cure is the plant, the stone is the bridge. 40 years of work. The life's research of a woman whose knowledge had been called dark craft by men who did not understand it and did not want to. I turned the pages. The later entries were in Briar's hand, the same precision, the same meticulous detail, but with additions. Updated dosing charts. Notes on individual wolves. A section titled Root Rot, Progression and Treatment that began with the words, "The blight enters through the bond anchor. It is not a surface illness. It is a structural failure. The anchor frays from the inside. No topical treatment will reach it. The remedy must follow the same pathway the sickness uses, inward, along the nerve cluster to the root." She had mapped the disease. She had mapped the cure. And she had done it alone, in a cabin in the deep forest, with no resources but her grandmother's burned notes reconstructed from memory, and her own relentless, quiet brilliance. I closed the journal and set it back on the shelf. When she came inside, I was sitting at the table with the broth untouched. "You reconstructed your grandmother's work," I said. "Every page from memory. It took me 4 years. And the blight, you understand it completely." "I understand it well enough to treat it. The wolves I have brought here, most of them were hours from the bond severing entirely. Once that nerve cluster dies, the wolf cannot find its way back to the human. It is not the fever that kills them. It is the loneliness. The bond breaks, and the wolf is alone inside a body that was never meant to hold only one soul, and it simply gives up." She said it plainly, without drama, the way a woman states a fact she has lived with for months. But her hands, wrapping around a cup of tea, were shaking. "How many have you saved?" I asked. 12, all 12 that I found in time. I lost one, the very first, a young male from the Northern Patrol. He was too far gone when I reached him. The bond had already severed. He died the second night." She paused. "I buried him behind the cabin under the birch. 13 dead in Thornmere's count. But one of those 13 was hers, the one she could not save, the one that had shown her what the blight truly was and sent her into the forest night after night to find the others before they reached the same end." "You have been crossing the boundary," I said, "into pack territory at night." "Yes. For weeks. For 3 months, since the first wolf dragged itself to my door, I knew there would be more. The blight moves through bond lines. One wolf infects the next through proximity, through the pack's shared nerve network. It is not random. It is a chain. I followed the chain backward and found the sick ones before they wandered too far. You carried them on a litter through the snow, alone. I am stronger than I look. A ghost of something, not a smile, but the memory of where a smile might have lived, crossed her face. And the wolves helped. Once the first few recovered, they came with me. Breck has been walking the territory with me for the past 2 weeks, scenting out the sick ones. He found 3 on his own. I looked at her across the table. This woman who had been thrown out of her home at 17, who had rebuilt her grandmother's life's work from memory in a cabin with no pack and no protection, who had spent 3 months hauling dying wolves through the snow and healing them with remedies the pack had declared criminal. And I understood 2 things at once. The first was that she was the most extraordinary person I had ever met. The second was that the bond between us, the one humming in my chest like a low, constant note, the one my wolf had recognized before I did, was not a mistake, not a coincidence, not a cruel joke of the fates. It was the only thing that had ever made complete sense. Briar. She looked up from her tea. I need you to come back to Thornmere. The ghost smile vanished. In its place, a wall, fast, practiced, seamless, the kind of wall a person builds when they have been hurt by the same hand too many times to count. No. The wolves in the stronghold will die, I know. I know how many are left, Kale. I know the blight is moving faster than I can intercept it from out here. I know that every night I cross the boundary I am risking the pack's justice, and I know that the justice of Thornmere is not gentle. She set her cup down with a deliberateness that was its own kind of anger. But I will not walk back through those gates, not past those boundary stones, not past the people who watched my grandmother be called a witch and said nothing. I will heal every wolf I can reach from this forest, and when the blight is over, I will disappear, and Thornmere can tell itself whatever story it needs. That is not what I am asking. It is exactly what you are asking. You are asking me to walk back into the place that threw me away and fix the thing their own healers cannot fix, and when it is done, they will find another reason to cast me out, because that is what people do with things they do not understand. They use them and then they burn them. Her voice cracked on the last word, not dramatically, barely at all, but enough. Enough for me to hear the 17-year-old girl underneath the capable woman. The girl who had watched her grandmother's notes turn to ash in a courtyard bonfire, and learned that knowledge and goodness are not always enough to keep you safe. I did not argue. I did not promise. I sat across from her in the lamplight of her small, clean cabin, with the wolves breathing softly outside and the fire popping in the hearth, and I said the only thing I knew to be true. You are right about all of it. The pack failed you. My father failed you. I failed you. I stood on that balcony and I did nothing, and there is no argument I can make that undoes that. I held her gaze. But there are wolves dying in my stronghold tonight, right now. Ashka, a gray she-wolf who has run the eastern ridge for 9 years, collapsed this morning, and my healer told me she has nothing left to try. There are 46 wolves still standing, and the blight is moving through the bond lines, and without you, some of them will die. Not because your pack deserves your help, because the wolves do. She was quiet for a long time. The fire cracked. The wind pushed against the walls of the cabin. Outside, one of the wolves, Breck, I thought, let out a low, questioning sound, as if he could feel the tension through the walls and wanted to know if everything was all right. The wolves, she said softly, not the pack. The wolves. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the wall was still there, but there was a door in it now, narrow, reluctant, barely ajar. I will need my supplies, the journals, the juniper stores, the willow bark. I have 3 months' harvest dried and ready. The moonstone powder is in the blue jar on the top shelf. Do not drop it. It took me 2 years to grind. I will carry everything. You will carry nothing. You will hitch the sled and load it properly. The juniper bundles go flat, not stacked. The jars go in the padded crate. The journals, she stopped herself, and I saw her hands tighten on the edge of the table. The journals are irreplaceable if anything happens to them. Nothing will happen to them. I will carry the journals myself. She looked at me. Her eyes were dark, steady, and so tired that I wanted to cross the table and take the weight from her shoulders with my own 2 hands. But that was not what she needed. What she needed was the thing she had not been given in 6 years, someone who kept a promise. "We leave at first light," she said. We left at first light. The 12 wolves walked with us, some strong, some still recovering, all of them staying close to Briar as if she were the center of a constellation that would collapse without her. Breck took point, his big dark head swinging left and right, scanning the forest with the alertness of a wolf who had been given a second life and intended to use it. The runt, a small, copper-furred female Briar had named Brindle, rode on the sled, wrapped in blankets, too weak to walk the full distance but stable enough to travel. I pulled the sled. Briar walked beside it, her hand resting on Brindle's flank, adjusting blankets, checking the jars when the sled lurched over a root or a frozen rut. She did not speak much. Neither did I. The forest spoke for us, the creak of the snow, the clean silence of the deep ashdown, the occasional call of a winter bird in the canopy. We reached the Tanny's boundary stones by mid-morning. Briar stopped. Her hand went to the carved wolves on the stone pillar, and she stood there for a moment, touching the marks she had made, looking back toward the forest that had been her home for 6 years. "My grandmother died out here," she said. "The second winter. She was 71 and the cold took her lungs and I could not save her." She pulled her hand back. "I buried her near the creek, next to the wolf I lost." I did not say I was sorry. The word was too small for what had been done. "She would have saved every wolf in the stronghold," Briar said. "She would not have hesitated. She would have walked back through those gates the day the first one got sick, and she would have healed them all, and she would not have cared what the council thought of her." She looked at me. "I am not as good as she was." "You are here." "Yes," she stepped past the boundary stones. "I am here." We came through the western gate of Thornmere just after noon, and the silence that fell over the yard was the loudest thing I had ever heard. They saw the wolves first, 12 animals walking in loose formation around the sled, some strong, some limping, all unmistakably alive and unmistakably Thornmere wolves. I heard the gasps, the half-finished exclamations, the sharp intake of breath from the handlers who recognized their own bonded animals among the 12. Harrell, a grizzled patrol captain who had not smiled since his gray vanished 3 weeks ago, took one look at his wolf sleeping against the sled rail and sat down in the snow as if his legs had stopped working. Then they saw Briar. The whispers started immediately. I heard them, not the words but the tone, the specific frequency of a community recognizing someone it had thrown away and not quite knowing whether to be ashamed or afraid. The Weed Woman's girl, Marin Tanny's granddaughter, the one they banished for dark craft. What is she doing here? Who let her back? Fen was at my side in seconds. "Kale. Clear the healer's hall, all of it. Every table, every bench, she needs workspace." "The council. The council can watch." I raised my voice. Not a shout I have never needed to shout. The alpha's voice carries its own authority when the alpha means what he says. "Listen to me, all of you. This woman has spent 3 months healing our wolves, the ones we were told were dead, 12 of them alive. You are looking at them. She knows what the blight is. She knows how to treat it. And she is the only person who can save the wolves still dying in our dens. She is here at my invitation, under my protection, and anyone who speaks a word against her will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" The yard was silent. I saw faces, shock, confusion, suspicion, a few flickers of something that might have been guilt. I saw Elder Hask standing at the edge of the crowd, his white beard stiff with cold, his expression unreadable. I saw Sira, my healer, staring at the 12 wolves with an expression that combined disbelief and dawning comprehension. "The healer's hall," I said to Finn. "Now." He went. Briar stood in the yard with the 12 wolves around her and the weight of 100 stairs pressing against her like a wind, and she did not waver. She looked at the stronghold, the stone walls, the iron gates, the courtyard where her grandmother's notes had burned, and her face was composed, calm, and so carefully held together that I understood the effort it cost her. I stepped close to her, not touching, close enough that the pack could see I was beside her. "Where do you want to start?" I asked. "The sickest ones first, show me." I showed her. The healer's hall had been cleared by the time we reached it. Finn worked fast when he understood the stakes, and the first wolf they brought in was Ashka, my Ashka. The gray she-wolf who had collapsed at dawn, whose ribs I had counted through her dulling fur, whose eyes had not tracked my hand. Briar knelt beside her. She placed both palms flat on Ashka's chest and closed her eyes, and I watched her go still, a different kind of still from anything I had seen. Not the stillness of rest, the stillness of someone listening with their entire body. "The third nerve cluster," she said, her eyes still closed. "It is nearly gone. Another 12 hours and the bond would have severed completely." She opened her eyes. "I need the juniper root, the jar with the red cord, willow bark, moonstone powder, a basin of hot water and a clean cloth, and quiet. I need quiet." Sira, standing in the doorway, was already moving. Whatever reservations the head healer had about the weed woman's girl, she was a healer first, and a healer recognizes competence the way a wolf recognizes its own kind. She brought the supplies without a word, set them on the table and stepped back. Briar worked. I had seen healers work before: Sira, the Greymont surgeons, the battlefield medics who patched wolves and warriors after border skirmishes. They were skilled, efficient, clinical. Briar was none of those things. Briar was something else. She ground the juniper root and the willow bark together in a stone mortar, adding moonstone powder in precise, measured pinches that she counted under her breath. She mixed the paste with hot water until it reached a consistency she could feel was right, not measure, feel. And then she lifted Ashka's head, cradled it in one arm, and began applying the paste to the base of the wolf's skull with her bare fingers, working it into the fur in small, slow circles, pressing it inward along a pathway that was invisible to everyone in the room except her. She talked to Ashka as she worked. The same low, steady narration I had heard in the cabin. "I know it hurts, I know. Hold on, you are going to feel a warmth. That's the juniper reaching the cluster. It is not dangerous. It is the opposite of dangerous. Let it in, breathe." And Ashka, who had not responded to any stimulus in 12 hours, opened her eyes. Not halfway, fully, clear, golden, alert. The wolf looked at Briar and something passed between them, something I could not name but could feel. A current of trust so absolute it hummed in the air of the room like a plucked string. Ashka's tail moved. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the wolf pressed her nose against Briar's wrist and held it there, and Briar's composure, the careful, practiced calm she had worn like armor since the moment I found her, cracked, and she closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the wolf's and whispered, "There you are. There you are." I stood at the edge of the room and felt the bond inside my chest blaze, so hot I nearly staggered. It was not the thunderclap. It was the fire that comes after, the slow, certain burn of something that was always there, waiting for the right moment to catch. And it caught. Standing in the healer's hall of my own stronghold, watching a banished woman save the wolf I had been told was beyond saving, the bond between us ignited, not like a spark but like a sunrise, vast and warm and impossible to deny. My mark, the Alpha's mark, the one that burned itself into the skin above my heart when I was 16 and had lain dormant ever since, waiting for its counterpart, woke. I felt it first as heat, then as light, then as a pulse that matched the rhythm of her hands on the wolf's fur. I pressed my palm against my chest, and through the fabric of my shirt I felt the mark glowing. Sierra saw it. Her eyes went wide and she looked from me to Briar and back again, and I saw the exact moment comprehension landed. The head healer's mouth opening, closing, opening again, no words coming out. I shook my head slightly. Not yet, not now. She had wolves to save. She saved them. One by one, they brought the sick wolves to the hall, and one by one, Briar knelt beside them and pressed her palms to their chests and found the dying nerve cluster, and fed the juniper and moonstone paste along the bond pathway until the fever broke and the eyes cleared, and the wolf remembered what it was like to not be alone inside its own body. Some took minutes, some took an hour. The worst, a young female whose bond had frayed so badly that the wolf could no longer feel its human counterpart at all, took 2 hours, Briar's hands shaking with exhaustion, sweat on her forehead, her voice hoarse from the steady narration that seemed to guide the medicine as much as her fingers did. I stayed. I held water for her, fetched supplies, carried the heavy wolves to and from the tables when the handlers were too stunned to move. I watched the room fill with pack members who had heard what was happening and come to see, first the handlers, then the patrol captains, then the families, then the elders. They stood along the walls and watched the Weed Woman's girl bring their wolves back from the edge of death, and the silence that filled the hall was not the silence of suspicion. It was the silence of people watching something they did not know how to deserve. Elder Hask arrived in the 3rd hour. He stood at the back of the hall, his arms folded, his face a mask of composure that I could read, because I had spent 20 years in council chambers learning to read the faces of men who hid their thoughts. He was afraid, not of Briar, of what Briar's presence meant, of what her competence revealed about the decision he had made 6 years ago, and the knowledge he had burned, and the woman he had sentenced to exile in the deep winter with a 71-year-old grandmother and no resources. He was afraid of being seen for what he was. By the 6th hour, Briar had treated every sick wolf in the stronghold. 11 animals, all of them stable, all of them showing the same pattern of recovery I had seen in the 12 at her cabin. Sierra stood beside her, taking notes with a speed that suggested she was documenting everything for a medical record she intended to study for the rest of her career. The handlers were in the yard, kneeling beside their bonded wolves, some of them weeping openly, grown warriors and patrol captains, weeping in the snow because the animal they shared a soul with was breathing clearly for the first time in weeks. Briar sat on a bench in the empty hall, her hands in her lap, her eyes closed. She was exhausted. I could see it in the line of her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she held herself upright through an effort of will that had replaced physical strength somewhere around the 4th wolf. I sat beside her, not touching close enough. "You saved 23 wolves," I said. 23, she repeated, "and the 12 at the cabin, and the one I lost." Her eyes stayed closed. "That is 36 lives that would not have needed saving if the council had listened to my grandmother 40 years ago." I did not argue. She was right, and we both knew it, and the only useful thing I could do with the truth was carry it forward. "Briar." She opened her eyes. "My mark woke, in the hall when you were healing Ashka. The Alpha's mark, the one that has been dormant since I was 16. She looked at me. Her expression was not surprise. It was the expression of someone who has felt something and did not want to name it because naming it would mean trusting it, and she had learned a long time ago what happened when she trusted Thornmere. "I felt it," she said quietly. "When I touched the first wolf, something pulled, not from the wolf, from the room, from you." She looked down at her hands. "I told myself it was the bond between the wolf and its human, that I was feeling the pack's connection, not ours." Silence. "I know what you are going to say," she said, "and I need you to hear me when I tell you that I cannot do this." I cannot be the banished woman who comes back and heals the wolves and then gets claimed by the Alpha King and lives in the stronghold as if the last 6 years did not happen. That is not a story I can walk into. The girl who walked past those boundary stones at 17, she is still inside me, and she is telling me to run. Then run, I said. She stared at me. I'm not going to hold you here. I'm not going to invoke the bond as a chain or a command or a reason you owe me anything. If you want to go back to the cabin and the forest and the life you built with your own hands, I will walk you there myself, and I will make sure no one from Thornmere crosses your boundary again. I held her gaze. But I want you to know what I see when I look at you, not the weed woman's girl. Not the banished healer. I see the woman who rebuilt 40 years of burned knowledge from memory, who carried dying wolves through the snow for 3 months, who sat in this hall for 6 hours and saved 23 lives with steady hands and a voice that did not waver. And I see my mate, the one my wolf has been looking for since before I understood what the looking meant. The hall was empty except for us. The fire in the hearth had burned low. The lamplight caught the edges of her face, the tiredness, the wariness, and underneath both, something fragile and fierce that I recognized because I felt it too. You stood on the balcony, she said. You watched them burn her notes. I did. And now I am the Alpha, and the Council answers to me. And I am telling you that what was done to your grandmother was wrong, and what was done to you was wrong, and no amount of wolf healing or mate bonds can undo it. But if you let me, I will spend every day I have trying to build something better than what you were given. She was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. The wind moved against the walls of the stronghold, and somewhere outside, a wolf, one of the recovered ones, I thought, let out a long, steady howl that was not distress or warning but something else. Gratitude, maybe, or relief, or the simple, unthinking joy of being alive and whole and known. I am not going to run, she said. I did not reach for her. I did not touch her. I sat beside her on the bench in the empty hall and felt the bond between us settle into place, not with a thunderclap, not with fire, but with the quiet certainty of a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a very long time. Good, I said. She looked at me, and for the first time she smiled. It was small, tired, careful, the smile of a woman who had not had a reason to smile in 6 years, and was not entirely sure she remembered how. But it was real. The next morning I called the council. I did not ask Briar to be present. She was in the healer's hall with Sira, mixing a large batch of the Juniper Moonstone remedy and teaching Sira's apprentices the bond pathway mapping technique her grandmother had developed. I could hear her voice through the stone walls, steady, patient, precise, and I let it anchor me as I stood at the head of the council table and looked at the faces of the men and women who governed Thornmere. Elder Hask sat in his usual chair. His expression was composed, but his hands, folded on the table, were not entirely still. 46 wolves in this pack are alive this morning because of Briar Tannies, I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. 23 of them were healed in this hall yesterday by a woman this council banished 6 years ago. 12 more were healed in a cabin in the deep Ashdown, where she has been living alone since the night my father signed the exile order. 1 wolf died before she could reach it, the only casualty that was not the Blight's fault, but ours. I let the number settle. The Blight is called root rot. It attacks the spirit bond's nerve cluster. Every remedy our healers tried, the ones this council approved and funded, treated the symptoms. The fever, the lethargy, they did not reach the root. Marin Tannies mapped the nerve cluster 40 years ago. She developed the treatment. She documented everything in journals that represented a lifetime of work. I looked at Hask. This council called it dark craft. This council burned her notes. This council exiled a 71-year-old woman and her 17-year-old granddaughter into the deep winter and told them not to come back. Hask's composure held, but barely. I could see the effort in the tendons of his neck. Marin Tannis died the second winter, alone in the forest. Her granddaughter buried her by the creek and then spent 4 years reconstructing her grandmother's life's work from memory. Every formula, every nerve map, every treatment protocol. She did it without resources, without pack support, without a single person who cared whether she succeeded or failed. I placed my hands flat on the table. And then, when the blight began, she did not wait for us to ask for help. She crossed the boundary every night for 3 months, found our dying wolves in the snow, carried them on her back to her cabin and healed them. 12 wolves. She saved 12 wolves before I ever knew she existed. The room was silent. I could hear the wind outside, and the faint sound of Briar's voice from the healer's hall, and the heartbeats of 11 council members who were beginning to understand the weight of what they had done. Briar Tannis is my fated mate, I said. The Alpha's mark woke yesterday in the healer's hall. This is not a political decision or a strategic alliance. It is the bond, and it is undeniable, and I am not asking this council's permission. Hask opened his mouth. I held up my hand. I am not finished. The banishment order is rescinded as of this moment. Briar Tannis is a free citizen of Thornmere with full rights, full standing, and a formal appointment as the pack's chief herbalist, a position that should have existed 40 years ago and would have, if this council had listened instead of burned. Any challenge to her presence, her authority, or her standing will be treated as a challenge to mine. Is that clear? 11 faces looked back at me. Some were shocked. Some were ashamed. 1 or 2, the younger council members who had not been present for the original banishment, looked relieved, as if they had been waiting for someone to say aloud what they had been thinking in silence. Hask stood. He was an old man, 70, maybe older, and I had known him my entire life. He had been my father's closest advisor, the architect of a dozen pack policies, the voice of caution and tradition in a council that valued both. He had also been the man who stood in the courtyard with a torch and burned the work of a woman who had devoted her life to healing wolves. "Alpha Morn," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the fracture underneath. I acted on what I believed to be true. You acted on what was convenient to believe. He flinched, a small movement, barely visible, but the whole council saw it. The pack owes a debt to the Tannis family that I do not know how to repay, he said, and I owe a debt that is larger. He paused. If Briar Tannis will accept an old man's acknowledgement that he was wrong, not an apology, because an apology is too small a word, I will give it. Publicly, if she wishes. You will give it, I said, and then you will sit with her in the healer's hall and learn the work you burned, every page, every formula. You will understand what you destroyed. He sat down. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. And for the first time in the 20 years I had known him, Elder Hask looked his age. The announcement went to the full pack that afternoon. I stood in the courtyard, the same courtyard where the notes had burned, the same courtyard where Briar had walked past the boundary stones as a 17-year-old girl, and I told them. I told them what she had done, the 3 months. The 12 wolves, the burned notes reconstructed from memory, the grandmother lost to the cold, the juniper and the moonstone and the steady, patient hands that had saved more lives than any healer in Thornmere's history. I told them she was my mate. I did not use the language of conquest or possession. I did not say mine as if she were territory I had claimed. I said, the bond between Briar Tannis and me is the truest thing I have ever known. It is not a reward she earned by saving our wolves. It is not a transaction. It is the fact that the universe, in its unfathomable patience, placed the woman who could heal this pack directly in the path of the Alpha who needed her, and then waited 6 years for him to be wise enough to see her. Briar stood beside me. She had not wanted to. She had argued, quietly and fiercely, in the healer's hall, that public declarations were unnecessary, and that the wolves were more important than ceremonies. I had agreed with her on both counts, and then asked her to come anyway, not for the pack, and not for me, but because the 17-year-old girl who had walked out of this courtyard in silence deserved to walk back into it with her name spoken aloud. She wore the same worn wool coat. She had refused anything finer. "They need to see me as I am," she had said, "not as what they want me to be." The pack saw her as she was. And one by one, starting with Harold, the grizzled patrol captain whose bonded gray was alive because of her. Then Sierra, who had spent the morning learning the nerve pathway mapping and understood, with a healer's precision, exactly what Briar's knowledge was worth. Then the handlers, the warriors, the families, the young mothers holding children who had seen their bonded wolves come home. One by one they bowed. Not the formal, stiff, commanded bow of a pack acknowledging authority. A different kind. The slow, deliberate, weighted bow of people who understood that they were standing in the presence of someone who had been wronged by the thing they loved most and had chosen to save it anyway. Elder Hask bowed last. He walked to the front of the crowd, stopped 3 paces from Briar, and lowered his head until his white beard nearly touched his chest. He stayed there. Briar looked at him. Her face was calm, composed, the same careful mask she had worn since the day I found her. But her eyes were full of something I had not seen in them before. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But a willingness to let the wound begin to close. "Get up," she said softly. "There are wolves to tend." He straightened. He nodded. And he walked with her to the healer's hall, and he sat beside Sierra, and he opened the first of the journals. The ones his own hands had consigned to fire 6 years ago, the ones Briar's hands had rebuilt word by painstaking word, and he began to read. The blight was beaten within a month. Briar trained Sierra and her apprentices in the full treatment protocol, the juniper moonstone paste, the bond pathway mapping, the vapor treatments for severe cases, the preventive dosing regimen that Marin Tannies had developed to strengthen the nerve clusters before the rot could take hold. She wrote it all down in new journals, 3 of them, copied in triplicate, stored in 3 separate locations in the stronghold. "Fire only works once," she told me, and the way she said it was so matter-of-fact that it took me a moment to hear the steel underneath. The 12 wolves from the cabin were absorbed back into the pack. Breck returned to the Eastern Patrol. Harold's Gray took up her old position on the ridge. The runt, Brindle, stayed with Briar. She had bonded to the small copper wolf in a way that was not quite handler and animal, and not quite the formal pack bond, but something older, warmer, more like the bond between 2 creatures who had kept each other alive through a very long winter, and were not inclined to let go. I did not rush her. The bond between us grew the way a fire grows in a well-built hearth, steadily, warmly, without the need for spectacle. She moved into the stronghold on her own terms in her own time, converting the old herb room off the healer's hall into a workshop that would have made her grandmother proud. She planted a juniper garden in the south courtyard. She built a drying rack for willow bark that was, I had to admit, more efficient than anything the pack's carpenters had designed. She called me by my name, not my title, not my station, my name. And every time she said it, Kale, my wolf, settled deeper into a quiet that was not silence but peace. We were mated formally at the winter solstice in the hall where she had saved 23 wolves, with Brindle curled at her feet and the whole pack standing along the walls. She wore the wool coat. I did not argue. The mark on my chest, the one that had lain dormant for 20 years, found its counterpart on her wrist the moment our hands joined. Not a blaze, not a flash. A warmth that spread from her fingers into mine and did not stop, and a light that glowed through the fabric of our sleeves like a lamp behind a curtain, and the collective intake of breath from 500 pack members who had just seen the bond made visible. She looked down at the mark on her wrist, a small, luminous knot in the shape of a wolf's eye, and then looked at me. And the careful mask she had worn for 6 years fell away entirely, and what was underneath was not the tired, wary, braced for the worst face I had come to know. It was simply Briar, unguarded, real, smiling the way a woman smiles when she has been offered something good and for the first time believes it will not be taken away. "There you are," I said. She laughed. A short, startled, slightly watery laugh that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "You stole my line. You said it to a wolf. It works for wolves and for kings." She squeezed my hand and the mark on her wrist pulsed once, warm and certain. "There you are." Thornmere did not become a different pack overnight. The scars of the banishment did not vanish with a council decree or a courtyard speech. There were whispers, for a while, old suspicions that took time to die, old habits of distrust that required patience and repeated proof to overcome. Briar did not demand their trust. She earned it the way she earned everything, quietly, steadily, with her hands and her knowledge, and the unshakable conviction that the work mattered more than the recognition. But I will tell you what changed. I will tell you that Sira, who had been the best healer in the Northern Territories by any measure, became something greater under Briar's teaching. A healer who understood not just the surface of a wolf's body but the deep architecture of its bond, the nerve clusters, the spirit pathways, the invisible scaffolding that held wolf and human together. She told me once, late at night, that learning Briar's methods was like being shown that the world had a second floor she had never known existed. I will tell you that Elder Hask read all 3 journals, cover to cover, twice. And then he asked Briar to teach him the bond pathway mapping, not because he intended to become a healer at 72, but because he wanted to understand the full weight of what he had burned. She taught him. She did not make it easy and she did not make it gentle, but she taught him, and the night he finished the last mapping exercise, he sat in the healer's hall and wept. She brought him tea. She did not say, "I forgive you." She said, "Now you know." It was enough. I will tell you that Brindle, the runt, the copper-furred female who had ridden the sled wrapped in blankets, grew into the steadiest, gentlest wolf in the pack. She did not join the patrols. She stayed with Briar in the herb room, pressed against her legs while she worked, sleeping by the workbench while the mortar ground and the juniper dried and the journals grew. I will tell you that on the first anniversary of the day, I followed a trail of litter marks through the snow and found 12 wolves alive at a stranger's fire. Briar planted a birch sapling in the south courtyard and set a small stone marker at its base. No name, no inscription, just the outline of a wolf and a sprig of juniper, carved by her own hand. I knew who the tree was for. I did not need to ask. I stood beside her while she packed the earth around the roots, and Brindle pressed her nose against the sapling's trunk and breathed on it once, as if blessing it, and Briar rested her hand on the small wolf's head and said nothing. Some debts cannot be repaid. Some wrongs cannot be undone. But a tree can be planted where ashes fell, and a granddaughter's knowledge can outlive the fire that tried to end it, and a woman who was told she was worthless can stand in the courtyard of the pack that threw her away and know, quietly, certainly, without needing anyone to say it aloud, that she was the reason it survived. I am Cale Morn, Alpha of Thornmere. I have led a pack of 500 through border wars and blight, and the long, humbling lesson of learning that the strongest thing a king can do is listen. But the truest thing I have done, the one that will outlast my name and my reign and the stone walls of this stronghold, is the morning I followed a trail through the snow, found a woman who had every reason to let my wolves die, and watched her save them anyway. She saved them, and then, without asking, without conditions, without a single demand for what she was owed, she saved us. That is who she is. That is who my mate is. The birch in the south courtyard is taller than me now. Briar tends it every spring, and Brindle sleeps beneath it in the summer heat, and the juniper she planted along the south wall has grown so thick that the whole stronghold smells of it on warm days, green and sharp and medicinal, the scent of a grandmother's kitchen and a granddaughter's stubborn, quiet, unbreakable love. Every morning I wake to the mark on my chest glowing faintly in the dark, and to Briar beside me, and to the knowledge, steady as the ground, warm as the hearth, certain as the bond that found us both, that the wolves of Thornmere are alive because one woman, banished and forgotten and dismissed as the weed woman's girl, refused to let them die. I would not trade a single day of this life, not the courtyard speech, not the council meeting, not the long walk through the snow with the sled and the 12 wolves and the jars of moonstone in their padded crate, not even the 6 years I wasted standing on a balcony doing nothing, because those years, my shame and her exile and the frozen silence between, are part of the path that led me to a cabin at the edge of the world, and a woman tipping broth to a dying wolf's lips, and the first true thing I ever felt. There you are,